This PowerPoint will cover the poems of William Carlos Williams. We start with This Is Just to Say, which is a really short poem, and it's easy to read this poem and dismiss it as silly or lacking meaning. But this is actually a really, really wonderful poem. It's one of my very favorite love poems in the whole world. Let's look at it and we'll talk about it. He says, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me. They were delicious, so sweet and so cold. Okay, so because it's a short poem, we have to do a lot of work as the reader to figure out what's going on. So I always imagine that this poem is like a post-it note that the speaker leaves for his wife in the morning. So she like finds the poem kind of on the refrigerator. And he tells her that he's eaten the plums that she was saving for breakfast. So this is a relationship we can infer that has been going on for a long time. These people know each other very well. He knows what she's going to eat for which meal. So he tells her, you know, I've eaten these plums that you were saving for breakfast. And he could have just finished the poem there, but notice that he says, forgive me. So he's asking for forgiveness. And again, he could just stop there, but he doesn't. He keeps going to tell her that they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. So for me, I think that's sort of funny. He's kind of asking for forgiveness, but he also wants her to know how good they were. So he's kind of poking a little bit of fun at her. So this relationship is not only long-standing, but they also are really secure with each other enough to kind of joke and have fun and play tricks on each other. This poem fits really well into the whole idea of imagism that we talked about at the beginning of the modernism section. So it doesn't have any flowery language. It doesn't have any symbolism. It's very clear, precise. It's written in everyday speak, everyday language. So this is a really kind of perfect example of a modernist poem. The next one is called Danse, Russe, which is basically translates to Russian dance. And this poem is really kind of a funny one. So one of the things that's interesting to note about William Carlos Williams is that he wasn't a poet as his profession. He was actually a pediatrician. And so he would often write poems on his prescription pad between seeing patients. But poetry was something he had to kind of do at night on his own. And so when I read this poem, I think about what that must have been like to be so creative, but to have it be something that you have to kind of do on the side after your day job. He says, if when my wife is sleeping, and the baby and Kathleen are sleeping, and the sun is a flame-white disk in silken mists above shining trees, if I, in my north room, dance naked, grotesquely before my mirror, waving my shirt round my head and singing softly to myself, I am lonely, lonely, I was born to be lonely, I am best so. If I admire my arms, my face, my shoulders, flanks, buttocks against the yellow-drawn shades, who shall say I am not the happy genius of my household? So this poem, again, it's written in very everyday speak. And remember, we said that modernists can find topics for poems anywhere. It doesn't have to be, grand or symbolic. It can just be part of, their kind of private lives, even if it's not beautiful. And so this particular poem, we have this really funny kind of personal image of the poet alone dancing in front of his mirror. He says he's dancing grotesquely, so you can imagine, I mean, we've all been alone and probably done weird things in the mirror that we would never want anyone to see. So he says, if you could see me doing that, waving my shirt around my head and singing, I am lonely, I was born to be lonely, and kind of admiring himself, that makes him the happy genius of his household, right? So he's not sorry. This is kind of the secret life he has, and he's not ashamed of it, right? So this is really kind of the poet's statement of his own practice. And I really like this poem because it really emphasizes that idea that that the topics of poems can come from anywhere during this period, even this kind of grotesque or private stuff that we do when we're alone. The last poem I included for you is my favorite of William Carlos Williams. This is a poem that he wrote about his mother when his father died. And this is called a persona poem. So a persona poem, if you remember from the very beginning of our semester when we did terminology, a persona poem is when a poet writes a poem as if like pretending to be someone else or in someone else's voice. So this poem, in this poem, Williams actually is sort of pretending to be his mother. So the poem, it comes from Williams' mother's point of view. As we read this, I want you to notice the color imagery and see if that might help us to kind of interpret the poem. Sorrow is my own yard, where the new grass flames as it has flamed often before, but not with the cold fire that closes around me this year. So we have a metaphor to begin the poem. Sorrow is my own yard. And so the woman, we know that she's a widow, right? And she's lost her husband. It's springtime. Spring usually symbolizes in poetry new life or rebirth. And in this case, we have here the juxtaposition of the springtime and all the flowers and blooming with death. So it's sort of like the outside world doesn't fit with what's going on inside this woman. 35 years I lived with my husband. The plum tree is white today with masses of flowers. Masses of flowers load the cherry branches and color some bushes yellow and some red. But the grief in my heart is stronger than they. For though they were my joy formerly, today I notice them and turn away forgetting. So notice here, she describes the flowers, which again, usually in springtime when we think about flowers, we think about how beautiful and joyful they are, but she describes them as masses of flowers. Masses is like a heavy, burdensome weight. So the flowers here are like reminding her of what she doesn't have. And they're all these vibrant, in-your-face colors. They're yellow and red. And she said, I used to love them. They used to be my joy, but today I just turn away from them forgetting. In the next part, she's going to mention her son. So here we have Williams writing as his mother, but mentioning himself, which is interesting. Today my son told me that in the meadows at the edge of the heavy woods in the distance, he saw trees of white flowers. I feel that I would like to go there and fall into those flowers and sink into the marsh near them. So if you notice the color imagery, the flowers that she sees and the grass that she sees in the beginning, it says it's flaming green. The flowers are red and yellow. So when her son mentions these white flowers that are near water and the edge of the woods, that's where she wants to go and just sink into the water and die. So she's really looking for an escape from this like bright, beautiful springtime because it doesn't match her inner feelings. So this is a great example of a persona poem. Williams is writing as someone other than himself. And this is really the first poem that we've had like this, but we will see some more persona poems. I hope that you enjoyed William Carlos Williams. Let me know if you have any questions.